Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV World, and of course with me are Farrukh Pitafi and Raja Faisal. We're going to be taking a look at something really special that happened today. Earlier, both me and Farrukh took the interview of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and we spoke to him regarding the 15-month-long term that has just passed by and the kind of challenges that it posed, and of course how his leadership dealt with all of them and brought the country where it is today. So we're going to be taking a look back at this 15-month time period and see where the government stands today and the kind of direction that now has been set moving forward as the caretaker setup takes over. So before we start our discussion, we're going to be taking a look at this particular interview and what the Prime Minister had to say. Hello, I'm Sana Maqbool from BTV World, and with me is Farrukh Pitafi. Today we're going to be talking about the 488 days long unique term that of course saw many challenges that the country has had to face, and we will be talking about this with the leadership of the country, the Prime Minister of Pakistan. Thank you very much, Mr. Shahbaz Sharif, for giving us the opportunity. Mr. Prime Minister, I want to ask you, with reference to the term that you've led, it has been very unique and there have been many tough decisions that you've had to take. I want to know two things. As a leader, how did you take your team along to support these difficult decisions, many of which were against political interests, like you've mentioned before? And secondly, as a Prime Minister of the country, is there anything that this term has taught you that perhaps that you didn't know before about running the country?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this has been my stint, which was filled with challenges which I had never come across in my lifetime, never. Challenges of sorts, inflation, economy, floods, devastating floods. Then of course our exports, our foreign relations, all these areas were brutally damaged by the previous government, and it was an uphill task. First to grasp and understand the depth of these problems, and then repair and recover from these very serious blows committed by the previous government to the state of Pakistan. And then, above all, I had to carry a coalition government of 13 parties, their strength ranging from a party of 84 members to a party of 1 member. And I have to, admit that I was never cut for this job to carry coalition. I am a person who believes in brick and mortar, serving the people with freedom of action. But since I was elected by these 13 parties, I took this responsibility upon myself that I'll have to show to the world that yes, under difficult and trying circumstances, then you have a coalition government, then you must take them along, listen to them, respect them, try to resolve issues, have deeper consultation. And I think this is a lesson I have learned, that when the going is tough, the tough gets tougher.
Absolutely. Are you confident you did your best?
Well, I'm satisfied that by the grace of God, we are leaving, at a point where things have started improving. That is by itself a great sense of satisfaction.
You are right, the challenges were humongous, and we have seen the kind of challenges your government faced. But in the face of adversity, we saw you showing remarkable leadership as well. For example, standby arrangement with IMF, that was some humongous surprise. Similarly, Geneva speech and your lobbying there. And finally, SIFC also. But all these challenges and their answers actually demand that there is consistent follow-up on every commitment that was made. now that you're leaving, how confident are you that we will complete the SBA and we will also be able to do something SBA, standby arrangements, commitments, and SIFC also, we will be able to do it. This country will be able to do it.
I agree with you. Nothing succeeds like success. And for that, you have to have a plan, a vision, and then implement it in letter and spirit. Words, speeches, stanzas can only try to encourage you, but it can only deliver results through hard work and untiring efforts. The recent example is obviously IMF deal. We never lost hope, and hoping against hope. We worked very hard in a united fashion, and God willing, we achieved it. Something which was at one point in time I thought is well nigh impossible.
You did it on the last day.
But exactly.
Yeah.
Two, SIFC is a program, a strategy, a mechanism. I have a full faith that if we are able to implement it through the approach of whole of the government, that means federal government, provincial governments, establishment, bureaucracy, political leadership, experts, professionals, and then put our whole effort into it through sincerity of purpose, believe me, we will turn around our economy in the next few years. But again, as I said, it requires leadership by example, it requires untiring efforts, sacrifice, sweat and blood. Without this, we'll not achieve anything. And I have no doubts that this time it'll happen.
Right. Regarding turning around the economy, I wanted to actually talk about the geoeconomics, age of geoeconomics, right? At this moment, we are talking about connectivity and working with the region. Recently, you made a statement regarding India also, that Pakistan will be ready to reciprocate any peace gesture. Now, the question is that we have been hearing this repeatedly coming from our side. Do you think that India at any point will be ready to reciprocate this gesture?
Let history decide that we always, approached, on these issues. Our approach was based on sincerity and the fact that this part of the world can always live in peace if we resolve our issues and move forward. That is my belief and article of faith with me. But it takes two to tango. If India doesn't respond positively, then so be it. We have tried our best, we'll continue doing this, but history will judge for itself who was right and who was wrong.
But if India doesn't reciprocate, we cannot wish away our neighbor.
No,
so do we have a plan B?
We will not dither, we will not waste our time, and we'll follow our direction.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for your precious time, and thank you very much for your views. Viewers, you have listened to the Prime Minister's interview. Of course, while this government's term comes to an end, the journey of democracy will continue, and we will keep on bringing you latest news and views as they happen. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.
Well, you heard a conversation earlier today with the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and of course a number of questions were raised with regards to how exactly is he taking a look back at his leadership in the past 15 months or so. And Farrukh, we were just talking about it even after the interview and then just in another program, that this is of course something that gave us an understanding of how he's feeling. And you also even particularly asked the Prime Minister off the record how he's feeling about the end of his tenure. and the leadership and looking back. And we got a sense of satisfaction, and he says that also in the interview, that he's happy with where he's at the moment, and how the government have sort of turned things around from where they actually picked up off. Do you think that's a correct assessment of the tenure?
Right. What I can very easily do, Sana, is I can flip the question and I can ask you, because you were also there and you were asking more pertinent
Absolutely,
questions.
but unfortunately I've asked the question already.
Yeah, but I can always take your lead and turn it around. But regarding Prime Minister's confidence, I thought that A, he was very confident. B, he was satisfied, as you pointed out. C, he also looked tired, because I think that, as he was himself saying, this was unprecedented kind of challenges that the Prime Minister and this government had to endure. Remember that when the previous government came in 2018, at that time also we kept on hearing that there are big challenges, but we never saw similar kind of so many catastrophes coming in. First of all, we saw floods. Then we saw what happened on May 9th, and of course in the backdrop it was continuously the talk of a bankruptcy or default. And then we also thought that standby arrangement with at that time it was EFF, that arrangement with the IMF extended fund facility will not continue. And at that time everybody kept on speculating that perhaps we are headed towards a default. And then out of nowhere, the Prime Minister actually pulled this surprise. It was like pulling this great magic trick where he convinced IMF to actually offer a standby arrangement. I think that was something that might have changed everyone's opinion about his leadership skill. Then we saw also that he went to Geneva. There also, the way he actually kept on connecting, of course, there were support from other ministers as well, Sharif Rahman, Foreign Minister and all. But Prime Minister has played a frontline role, and that was also great. And finally, SIFC. So the Prime Minister actually has indicated that he has moved the country in the right direction. And now we have to wait and see how it goes further. And he actually, I thought that he left a set of guiding principles for his successor also, that you need to actually lead from the front, and you have to keep the national interest and all these interests in mind. So I thought that the Prime Minister was satisfied. He was happy also, but of course there is this feeling of being able to do more had he had got time, right? So I hope that his successor, whoever he chooses, will be able to carry on that mission.
Right, absolutely. Let's also welcome in the discussion Mr. Muneeb Qadir, who's a political analyst and legal expert. Thank you very much, Muneeb, for joining us and being part of the debate. And we're talking about, of course, what our experience has been in terms of interviewing the Prime Minister, but I also want to also take a look at the perspective that you have in terms of the previous tenure, and of course this 488-day long term that was led by Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, and exactly what a sort of assessment would you have in mind in terms of where it began, and now when the term is actually ended, what exactly is the way forward in terms of the direction that has been set? Do you think that despite the challenges and the tough measures that the government had to take, it did bring a country to a point where at least we know where it should be headed?
It's been a very tumultuous period for the PDM government, and I think even saying that would be an understatement, a very turbulent period, because I think that the kind of political circumstances that we saw, the political turmoil, it's almost unprecedented because for the first time in Pakistan's political constitutional history, we saw a prime minister being ousted constitutionally through a vote of no confidence, and that was a populist government. So when the PDM government came into power, they had, some immediate challenges staring at them in the face, economic challenges, the agreements that the previous government had with IMF, and they needed to, be taken forward, and political instability. And then, to make matters worse, even natural occurrences, they didn't tend to be on the side of the government either. What with the devastating floods that we saw last year, which further deepened the economic crisis that the country was facing, and then to make matters worse, there was also rise in terror incidents. So the government was really faced with tough choices, not even choices, I wouldn't even say choices, with very tough surrounding circumstances at every single point of the way. So if Mr. Shahbaz Sharif does come across in his interview with you as having gone through a very exhausting period, I believe that it would be perfectly legitimate for him to feel that this was perhaps the toughest phase of his life, and also I think one of the toughest phases faced by Pakistan, and that's quite saying something because we've had many difficult chapters previously as well. Having said that, there were some wins, there were some losses. At the very beginning of the PDM government's coming into power, of course, the economic crisis that I just mentioned, the petroleum subsidy to begin with, that was delayed. There were immediate import restrictions so as to preserve Pakistan's foreign reserves, but at the same time might have put a lot of traders at a disadvantage. So balancing that out became difficult, and then of course there were a lot of conspiracies being run by the opposition, by the previous ruling party. Instead of fighting their political fight in parliament itself, they resigned en masse, and they tried reflecting their bargaining power through street power. Actually, they took to the streets, they spread a lot of anarchy. At least they tried their best, and they also tried deal. So the IMF deal seemed to be dwindling at that time. But well in time, just this year in July, finally the PDM government did manage to come to an agreement with the IMF, and money having been lent by China and other Pakistani allies, and so that saved the day. We were safe from defaulting, and that is no mean feat. So that is something of a victory for Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif and his government. But of course, there was also a tug of war that they were embroiled in with the judiciary. That at the one hand, the government, using their majority in the parliament, were passing laws, and the judiciary were declaring them to be unconstitutional or striking them down left, right, and center. And so we also saw a lot of division within the judiciary as well, which was not the government's fault, so to speak, but did put the government in a tough spot vis-a-vis the judiciary. So unprecedented times, desperate times call for desperate measures. And in that regard, the PDM government did weather some very tough storms and conditions. Now, how are they going to go forward from here now that their term has ended? And how are the elections going to go in what direction, whether they would return back in power? And if they do, how will they then address the outstanding challenges? That, of course, remains to be seen.
Right, right, absolutely. And Faisal, before we talk about anything else, I also want to ask you as a viewer what your analysis is of the Prime Minister's answers to our questions, because especially when we take a look at questions of, say, the economic challenges that the leadership has had to face, and then of course the geopolitical relations, also our foreign policy, especially in terms of our neighbor India. What exactly do you think you perceive in terms of the way that the Prime Minister responded as to what Pakistan needs to be doing in this matter?
Sana, first of all, it was a brilliant short interview, and I think the question asked, they were very relevant and to the point. And I think equally, Prime Minister of Pakistan, he answered to the point, and his focus, what I could judge it of by that short interview, was on foreign policy and economy of Pakistan. And of course, if we look at the economy, when he took the office, he was facing lots of trouble. Obviously, if we talk about the IMF, there were challenges, and IMF was going blunt day by day. And of course, we know that the way the previous government, obviously now it is previous, the previous government, they took care of it, and they secured a package which was much needed one for Pakistan's economy. And practically speaking, the government saved Pakistan from bankruptcy, you know. And this was done, and if we look towards the foreign policy side, there were different dimensions to his foreign policy, and of course we only talking about 488 days, and during this time the foreign policy, as he himself mentioned, that there was a lot to fix, because the previous 3.5 years of the government of the previous setup by the opposition party, of course there were a few of the countries that were disgruntled with Pakistan, and we saw that the ways were mended with them, and same goes out for the region as well. Of course, his visits in the Middle Eastern countries, they mattered the most. Then his visit to China, it was very important, and of course the way he offered our eastern neighbor for the talks, that was quite significant as well. That here is Pakistan always ready for the talks, but of course, as he himself mentioned, that it takes two to tango, and that tango didn't take place because the other party was not there to tango. And overall, if I one-liner, I think it was an excellent tenure, a very short one, but he tried his best, as he himself said, and Farrukh during the interview mentioned as well. Not during the interview, but earlier mentioned that he looked a bit tired as well. Of course, I think internally, if we talk about the internal politics of Pakistan, that was hefty enough to make him tired. But at the same time, he had a lot to look after, which he tried his best. And to me, I think overall his performance was remarkable.
Right. Looking ahead, Farrukh, it's important, of course, to understand how exactly will now this direction be taken forward in a positive way. And of course, we want to be able to see the country progress even further than where it stands today. And this is linked to a question you also raised with regards to the issue of continuity, especially in terms of the major areas that were undertaken by the leadership of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif. So I want to know whether or not this sort of onus and responsibility or power was there in the hands of this particular leadership in order to lay down the ways in which this continuity was actually going to be ensured, or whether this is something that now lies in the hands of the next setup, whether it is the caretaker or the one that is elected eventually to take the country forward.
Right, absolutely, and that is a very valid question. That's why we asked this question at that time, Sana, also. But before that, I wanted to actually go back to what Faisal was saying. And while he was saying it, on screen, one quotation from the Prime Minister, actually the question that you raised, answer to that, about successfully leading 13 party coalition. I think that itself is a record in Pakistan's history. It has never happened. And I think that if the Prime Minister does not deserve maybe Victoria Cross or Iron Cross or Medal of Honor, perhaps he does deserve a Purple Heart for the kind of sacrifices I'm sure he must have made. But regarding continuity, first of all, you have to set the trajectory. And we have seen that the Prime Minister essentially, by taking a lead on these matters, has actually defined trajectory. And luckily, we have, most of the state institutions that are in sync, that are simpatico. We have seen that the Army Chief has gone out of the way to support the SIFC agenda, and we should be grateful. Now, the point is, once the trajectory is set, what happens next? Next is, of course, there's going to be a caretaker setup. We don't know how long it is going to be there because of delimitation issue, but it is going to be there for finite time, right? After that comes an elected government. Now, if your question is essentially about what comes tomorrow, day after tomorrow, that is caretaker setup, so the Prime Minister has the lever in his hand to define that trajectory also, because who actually appoints the next or nominates the next caretaker Prime Minister? It is the Prime Minister in consultation with the opposition leader. And we have been discussing this, that opposition leader will not be totally opposed to any name that comes from the Prime Minister's mouth, right? So,
but is this nomination enough as a way to define the way forward?
Right. What do you mean by way forward? 30 years later, Sana?
No, in terms of the caretaker setup and also the projects that are involved. For example, the success of the standby arrangement.
Yeah, regarding that, of course, how this country works regarding the appointment of caretaker, what happens is that the Prime Minister is nominated, he takes over, then he nominates a cabinet, and that cabinet usually has very able people. And this time they are empowered with economic tools to ensure that we can meet all the commitments regarding SBA. And then SIFC also, with that kind of equipped tool shed, right? I think that in coming days, what we are going to see is continuation of good policies of this government, the outgoing government. And with that, I can hope, and I'm assured by various people, that we are going to see further progress in that direction. If that happens, Sana, right now the first thing, as I keep on saying, is to fix your vitals of economy. Once vitals are fixed, and that seems to be the case thanks to the SBA, thanks to the reforms that we are bringing, after that then you can actually start earning more to ensure that you can provide relief to the common man on the street as well. Because usually what happens is that when you have a populist leader like the previous government or previous to this Prime Minister, populist agenda is usually short term. What do? You make commitments, but you cannot fulfill that because you have to take some decisions that are tough. So what do? You actually ignore those commitments and you start trying to provide relief at the cost of the long-term longevity and health of your economy. So if that is not going to happen, Sana, the next government and next to next government will be able to ensure that economic vitals are better, that the Prime Minister's agenda and this government's agenda can be fulfilled, especially when it comes to attracting more investment, to ensuring that there is more job creation, that with that kind of connectivity and that kind of investment, you can do something better for the common man on the street as well. And that is I speaking as a common man on the street.
Right, absolutely. Mr. Muneeb, so when we talk about the issues with regards to what the caretaker setup will have to deal with, I want to know how crucial it will be who the caretaker PM is, and when exactly, when we find this out, the reasons and the factors behind that decision also, whether it's through consensus between the PM or the leader of the opposition, or through the parliamentary committee, or through the ECP. But in all of these choices, the factors that are being considered, what do you think are the most important, and how exactly is this going to then sort of lay out a chart in terms of what we can then expect given the numerous political and economic challenges the country faces?
Well, the president has given a deadline of 12th August by when there should have been an agreement between the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition, Mr. Raja Riaz. So, I mean, that we will get to know very soon who happens to be the caretaker Prime Minister. But of course, there is a certain code of conduct in place as well as to how the caretaker government is to be appointed and how they're to conduct themselves and what their powers are. Interestingly, there have been amendments to Section 230 of the Elections Act enhancing some of the powers of the caretaker government, and that does understand, given the context of the economic circumstances of the country, that a lot of agreements that Pakistan has entered into with IMF, they need to be honored, and without those powers given to the caretaker government, there could be no continuity in Pakistan's external commitments with the IMF. So that one does understand. And although Mr. Pitafi just mentioned that, the caretaker government would be in place for a finite time, it does seem that this could be an extended for which the caretaker government stays, because now that the elections are expected to be conducted on the fresh digital census, that means that the delimitation process could take months, and most likely then elections could be pushed to the first quarter of 2024. So in that regard, there is some uncertainty, but what is certain is that eventually we would have a government which would be returned by the election when they do take place. Now, what challenges, because that's what you're asking, what challenges lie ahead? Well, as I said, this sort of tug of war that has been going on for months now between the parliament and the judiciary. I think that is one of the many outstanding issues that need to be resolved, because the PD government, which was just recently in place, it had to fight a war on a lot of fronts, and one of those fronts was its relationship with the judiciary and institute balance with the judiciary. Just today, as I'm speaking, Supreme Court Review of Orders and Judgments Act passed by the Parliament has been struck down. It's by the Supreme Court itself and declared unconstitutional. Just when the Parliament is not in session. So these are the kinds of issues that need to be looked at. Also, as far as foreign relations of Pakistan are concerned. Now, a lot had been done in that regard by the PDM government when they took over post-April 2022. I think that the Foreign Office, our foreign ministry team led by Mr. Bilal Bhutto Zardari and Ms. Hina Rabbani Khar in a very key role, I think they helped a lot in re-establishing Pakistan's foreign relations, particularly with the Western Bloc. And the way I'd also say that, our climate change minister, Ms. Sherry Rahman, she championed the cause of climate change on a global level, given that Pakistan was particularly affected in the worst way possible, the ordeal that we went through at the hands of the devastating floods last year. I think that was a major victory on the global stage. But also we saw that, relations tensed up a bit in recent months with Afghanistan. That needs to be ensured. And also Mr. Pitafi just mentioned, whilst referring to Mr. Shahbaz Sharif's interview, the SIFC initiative, by which, Mr. Shahbaz Sharif has envisaged attracting greater foreign investment and relying more on increasing Pakistan's exports. And now, that's something which could be very instrumental to giving Pakistan a stable economy. So I hope that, the government, whichever government comes into power, does manage to, take that vision further and forward. But we had a 13-party coalition. Again, that was quite an achievement of sorts, to have so many diverse political parties with their own political ideologies coming together. And what I saw was some semblance of respect for the parliamentary process, because the government which was in place before the PDM came into power, unfortunately, they did not really believe in the parliamentary process as much. And Mr. Shahbaz Sharif's predecessor, I think, he made a record of the lowest attendance in National Assembly, standing at 11%. So I hope that doesn't get repeated.
Right, absolutely, and I'll explore this further, but I also want a clarification with reference to the empowerment of the caretaker setup, and of course the way that this will now then pan out in terms of actual action. I understand that it's been done so regarding perhaps say the economic challenges or the SPA, but also in terms of now that the time period has increased, do you think that this particular empowerment also has some sort of downside or costs that are also related to it or involved in the way that we move ahead, especially in terms of the upcoming general election as well, or issues with the Supreme Court, for example, or any other aspect of foreign policy or other aspects that might maybe perhaps see a delay, or any other, in your perspective, issues that can possibly arise out of this empowerment and the increase in the term of the caretaker setup?
Very good question. That under Article 218 of the Constitution, it is incumbent upon the ECP to ensure that free and fair elections are conducted, and that can only happen if the caretaker government is neutral. So what kind of caretaker prime minister would we have? For example, a politician with alliance with a political party which is contesting election, or would be more of a technocratic setup? So these are very important questions, because our foreign relations, to quite an extent, they do hinge upon democracy and rule of law in the country. And it's to America's credit, to the USA's credit, that despite the opposition trying to lobby that America issue a statement, for example, condemning the opposition chairman's recent arrest, which, by the way, has been done quite lawfully, America has stated that that is Pakistan's internal matter, but what they are really concerned about, or what they care about, is that rule of law and media freedom and democracy and democratic norms should prevail in Pakistan. So, provided that those guarantees could be made and the international community could be, given some sort of assurance that there is political stability in Pakistan, that that would encourage the international community to also engage economically with Pakistan, because if there is political upheaval, that obviously compromises Pakistan's economic stability. So these are the immediate challenges that I can see, but other than these, not quite. I think everything else seems to be falling into place.
And I'll explore this question further as well, Farrukh, and I'll come back to you. But Faisal, when we talk about the coalition partners, and of course the kind of unique term that was led by the Prime Minister, I want to now understand, of course, as we move towards eventual general elections, we of course know that this is something that we're not going to be seeing moving forward as well, with different parties and their own campaigns. But beyond that, after the elections, do you hope for any sort of way forward in which there will be some residual elements of such a coalition alliance that will then also become part of the eventual way of governance in the country? Can that be a possibility?
A very good question. And first of all, the previous obviously 15 months, which 15 or 16 months of the government, we know that there were 13 parties, and of course the gelling they had, it was unprecedented. And of course this PDM dissolved here because they are heading towards the elections. And I was, 2 or 3 months ago, I was expecting that they might end up going to the elections as a PDM and as a coalition against the obviously the opposition party, a single party. But now obviously post 9th May situation is quite different. So now we can say that they will be heading towards the election as a individual party.
Faisal, do you think such a coalition could have been possible in the absence of a common enemy?
A common enemy in the absence?
Not at all.
Not at all. But if of course the enemy was there, and if they would have thought, why I'm saying this, because if you take the recent examples of the by-elections, in the by-elections, of course, wherever there was only an individual contesting against that party, of course the 13 parties, they were in a coalition, and they were fighting together, and it was turning out to be good for PDM at that time. Especially if we take the example of very recently, that there was this election of a lower level in KPK, where though the opposition party won the seat, but if we add up all of the votes taken by the rest of the parties, of course their votes are, as a PDM, their votes are more than the PTI's votes. So I was already expecting that they might end up going towards the election as a PDM, but now of course we know that they are going to elections as individual parties. But at the same time, I am I suspect that they will be sort of doing the seat adjustments. There are quite important people within the Punjab that needs to be in the parliament, and People's Party and PMLN, they obviously agree upon that the very important people, the very important personalities who matter the most, they need to get back into parliament, and the only way they can do it through is that they simply do the seat adjustments. And I am expecting that within Punjab there will be seat adjustments when it comes to two major parties of PDM, and let's hope that this is how it turns out to be, because if this is the case, then in that case, of course, I will see quite a few names from People's Party who need obviously assistance from PMLN in Punjab, and they are very remarkable names within Punjab. If they end up back in the National Assembly, then that would be good for not only for Pakistan, but of course the democracy of Pakistan.
Right, and Farrukh, you were shaking your head while Faisal was talking about seat adjustments. So you can begin with that, but also add to that.
I want to begin with something else, by the way. Very quickly, it is a compliment. Take it. Today you are on fire. Every question you are asking is brilliant, by the way. Yeah. Now go ahead.
Thank you. So when we take a look at the current situation, and what I was earlier also talking to Muneeb about, I want you to comment on that and also add to that whenever we take any particular decision, or the government of course has decided whether or not the cost, the benefits are outweighing the costs, so especially when now we look at the new census results also being taken into account, and of course the delimitations also being in order. Is that something that we absolutely needed in the conduct of these elections given the current scenario, and that the benefits of that does in fact outweigh the costs involved, and of course then also the costs that eventually are involved with the elongation of the time period of the caretaker setup?
First of all, I looked at the watch to ensure that I'm not given 30 seconds in the end.
Right? No, you have enough time. And I also want you, in fact, to add on what Faisal was saying, but I'll come to that after you're done.
Okay. Regarding two or three things. One, I was shaking my head because PDM, People's Party and ANP are not part of PDM, right? So there was no question of PDM actually going as a coalition alliance into the election. And when he says that two leading parties of PDM, I'm sure that he means PMLN and JUIF, because they are the two leading parties of PDM, right? People's Party is not part of it. Secondly, I don't think that the common enemy, especially because you were talking earlier about that, and that was fascinating question, because that took me back to General Musharraf's time when ARD was first created. Just before General Musharraf actually took over, before that People's Party and PMLN were at loggerheads, so much so that Mohtarma Benazir Bhutto had to flee the country, right? She was sitting abroad because she was going to be prosecuted through Accountability Bureau. If you remember, what was his name, gentleman, Saifur Ahmad, because of that. Later, the moment General Musharraf took over, they united and they actually signed a Charter of Democracy, right? So common enemy is always important. It is sad that common enemy usually comes from within us rather than without, because in the end, I can see, and I give you a prediction, if this caretaker setup gets extended beyond limits, any kind of limits, and there is some kind of other kind of arrangement, there will always be a possibility that there might be 14-party alliance that might even include PTI, because then it becomes alliance of restoration of democracy. Having said that, in the elections, do I see them actually cooperating? I don't think so. People's Party is very possessive about its Sindh, constituency, and similarly PMLN is very protective of its constituency in Punjab. So I don't think they are going to allow any kind of seat adjustments either. But having said that, when you talk about PM candidate, I'm not going to vote this time or any time in the future. I've told you repeatedly. But I can always hope that a younger man, that was our foreign minister, becomes prime minister, because he is the only one. I've never seen him using any coarse language against anybody, right? Now your question again, you'll have to repeat because I got captured.
Right, absolutely, and that was with regards to census, but let me just build on this first. When we talk about the coalition setup, I understand that it may not be something that we'll see in the elections, but beyond that I want to know, when these parties have worked together and they have had different ministries and they have also shared, of course, different posts and different challenges together, will that not result in anything fundamentally different in the way that eventually now these people, whatever positions that they may have, will get to work in, and will that not sort of have an element of cooperation involved that perhaps wasn't seen before? Or do you think that this sort of unique coalition alliance that we saw in the history of the country will just come and go and be gone and forgotten?
Yeah, amazingly, that is again a very really interesting question, but amazingly because you know, one aspect is there that you actually posed earlier, common enemy. Remove the common enemy and tell me, do you think they will continue to work together in tandem? I don't think so, right? Because this is not the nature of our electorate, our elections, our politics. Pakistan, my tomorrow's column is essentially about darker element of populism, right? And this is the concern that I have. There's always this constituency, somebody feels compelled to actually go and appeal to it. Why is it that Bhutto Sahab first actually went and appealed to populism? Then Mian Nawaz Sharif went and appealed to populism. Then PTI's chairman also went and did exactly that. So that constituency is increasing, it is not going away, Sana. So somebody is going to actually play to it. If they play to it, what exactly is going to happen? More clashes. So I think that the kind of evolution or maturity we are expecting, it will come. But it won't come within my lifespan. It won't come within lifespan of my children. That's why we have to be patient. And I think that the most important thing, and this is what politicians forget, especially the former Prime Minister, the PTI chairman forgot that you need patience if you want to build on your own momentum.
Right.
If you try to do it quickly, you end up killing the gold-laying goose, and that is exactly what happened.
Right, absolutely. Muneeb Sahab, very quickly, I'll bring the census question to you. Do you think that it was absolutely a better decision to take to bring in the new census results in the general elections than to do elections on time?
Depends on whose point of view we are looking at it from, because there are a lot of there's a section of the society which does feel that the elections should take place within 90 days, because that's what the Constitution says, that if the National Assembly is dissolved before it ends its term, and that's exactly what's happened, then it should take place within 90 days. But just like I said, that doesn't seem possible because of the delimitation exercise. So from that aspect, perhaps this could make one feel, or observers feel, a bit uncertain, and hence it could be a bit underwhelming that the elections could not be taking place in time. But on the other hand, one could even counter argue that you need to contest the elections and hold the elections on the basis of fresh census. You can't be relying on the 2017 census for 2023 election. So it depends the point of view that you're looking at from.
More wait for you.
No brainer. No brainer, frankly. How can you overlook 30 million people?
All right. Muneeb, you want to answer that?
I just missed what you said.
I said the two arguments that you gave, which one holds more weight for you?
For me personally, I think the first one. I do believe that there should be timely election. Absolutely.
Opinions, but thank you very much, Muneeb, for joining us. Thank you, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for being part of the debate. There is much, of course, that remains to be seen as we end this particular tenure, of course, with the leadership of the Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif. But we're glad that it came to a point which was far better than where this office was first taken over by him. And we're looking forward to an encouraging time as well, where whoever comes next, be it the caretaker setup or the next elected government, also takes lead and takes the torch forward and brings the country to further progress. That's all that we have from the debate. Have a nice weekend. We'll see you Monday on Jashn-e Azadi.